please welcome a true legend in our community, Mr. Whitley Strieber.
Thank you very much, Ron. I'm very iffy about being a legend. The reason is, what's next? Well, I'm very happy to be here. My lecture has survived, oddly enough. I've had the experience of opening the folder and finding nothing there. I've had the experience of the print turning to dust. And today we had the experience of the disk simply not working for a while, but only for long enough to get me a little upset. But everything's working now, and I'm happy for that. Ron made reference to communion, and that was the book that initiated contact. Of course, I had no idea at the time that this was the case. I was simply writing a book about an interesting and unusual experience. I didn't even think it would be all that big a deal. It was sort of a detour in my life as a science fiction and horror novelist. And it turned out to be a terribly important thing, and not only for the book itself, but for the picture on the cover, because that face triggered memories in millions of people. You notice something interesting about this. We talk about disclosure, we look to the government, we're frustrated about all of that, but that's not where to look. You're where to look. That's where they went. They went to you. They didn't go to the government. Okay? Now, over the course of this weekend, I'm going to be going to you. This lecture we're going to go back over some of the things that happened in the past and why it's like this right now. And then tomorrow, Sunday, I'm going to go into detail about the actual experience that people are having of contact. It's very different from what you may read. After we published Communion, we got hundreds of thousands of letters, many of which are now collected at Rice University in an archive called the Archives of the Impossible, which is certainly an accurate name. And I'm going to go into analyze some of those experiences deeply. And what you're going to discover is it's not about, at least not in these people's experience and in mine, being talked to about being given messages and teaching and anything like that. It's an attempt to build a bridge between two worlds, two minds that are very different from each other and to each other are very strange. And when you cut down to the reality of it, that's what I think is really going on here. Then on Monday, I'm going to go into what my own experience is like now, because when I first started this, I had a choice. Was I going to let my fear rule or my curiosity rule? And I had a pretty bad time on the night of the first close encounter experience. I got raped, and I was just, I didn't expect it. When you wake up in a room and it's full of gigantic, what look like insects, you're naturally concerned. And so, and then when I realized I couldn't move and they were invading my body, it was rough. And I screamed and I struggled, and what they did to me was a rape, and it wasn't intentional that I got injured because I was struggling so much. And that injury I was under treatment for that injury at various times for the next 20 years because it was quite a severe one. I also had the experience of becoming the rectal probe man, thanks to South Park and the Simpsons and so forth. And so stands before you the only person in modern times whose rape has become a laughingstock. And always remember, those of you who aren't among us experiencers, we are about the last social group that can safely be bullied. And every bully out there comes after us. So have a heart when you see a close encounter witness being bullied. Step up and say, hey, wait a minute. It's over. Don't do that to this person anymore. Thank you. All this machinery up here. It almost always goes wrong in my lectures, and everyone who knows me knows that, and they know why. But I don't. Okay, now let's do this. Let's go back to the beginning, all the way back, and we're going to go through some of the military stuff, because way back at the beginning, President Truman started with the military. He had a choice in 1946 and 47 when this began to unfold, and he made the wrong choice. He should have started with the scientific and academic communities, not with the military. But the military was the tool he had to protect the people from the unknown. And that's where he went. And it's understandable. It's not a mistake that you can look back and say, oh my God, he was a fool. He wasn't. He was doing his job. And he had just come off of a world war. He just dropped the atomic bomb. And these men were all living in a state of war still when this happened. Now, what did happen is this. It was a fundamental error, by the way, and it cannot easily be corrected now. And the reason I want to go through it is you have to understand this error and its significance in order to understand why our contact experience is like it is. Because they are, when you come down to it, small, vulnerable creatures, some of them biological and some of them mixed biology and technology. And they're vulnerable, and they're scared, and they're here for reasons, some of which are pretty obscure. But one thing is quite clear. They are here because they want us to survive. Now, we have a history of violence with them at this point, and it's quite a long history. We also have, among us, a history of lying about it at every level. There are a lot of people out there who have not, in fact, had contact experiences, who will go before you and tell you stories that are made up. And some of them occasionally will admit it, but mostly they don't. That's not all of us. Believe me, there are a lot of others out here who are trying hard to do this right. In any case, this is, this is General Nathan Twining. He was a ferocious officer who had, and you can see that in his face. This is a warrior you're looking at here. And he was the head of Air Materiel Command at Wright Field. My uncle Mickey was, I believe, a major at the time, and he was in Air Materiel at Wright Field. And his commanding officer, General Arthur Exon, who was a colonel, I think, at the time. I could have their ranks wrong. It could have been that Art was a lieutenant colonel and Mickey was a captain. In any case, they were involved in Air Materiel when the debris and bodies were brought in. So this is very much in my life a family affair. I did not know this until after I published Communion, and Mickey, my uncle, called me from his retirement, from Air Force Retirement Village at Lackland Air Force Base, and said to come on down. He said, I have read your book and I have some things to talk to you about. And I said to Ann, Mickey wants to talk to me about communion. And no one knew what he did. He was attached to the Atomic Energy Commission for his entire career and literally buttoned his mouth. He didn't tell anyone anything about his job. And I don't know much. I know more than some of his kids. So I'll tell you, one of the things that was fascinating about him, I was staying at an aunt and uncle's house in Washington. They were in Spain and on a vacation, and they had let me use their place. He was then a lobbyist. He had been an undersecretary of state, I believe, during the Eisenhower administration. And so I was staying there, and all of a sudden I walked in from touring Washington, and there were all these clothes hung up on these clotheslines all over the living room. And I thought, what in the world is going on? I thought I had the place to myself. And then a little while later, Mickey comes waltzing in. And he says, hi. I said, Uncle Mickey, I'm so glad to see you. I was 13 or 14 at the time, traveling with a friend. And in those days, it was no big deal for a couple of young boys to travel anywhere, and get in a plane or train, and we just went. So we were, and I said, well, he said, yeah, I'm just passing through. I've got a report to make at the Pentagon, and I'm going to wash my clothes. I hope you don't mind they're hanging up and drying. I said, not at all. What kind of report? At that time, the Russians had just blown off a 50 megaton hydrogen bomb, and it was big news. And he said, oh, there was this bomb, and I need to make a report about it. I said, you mean the big bomb the Russians just blew off? He said, yeah, but it's nothing to worry about. It's the size of a football field. I thought, how do you know that? And I said, well, I said something along the lines of, how do you know that? And he said, I saw it. That was it. I never heard another word about it from him. So he was a pretty cool guy in a lot of ways, and I found him quite marvelous. And so anyway, I go down there to Air Force Retirement Village, and he says, this book is interesting, and General Exon and I have some things we would like to tell you about. And he proceeds to tell me about being at Wright when the bodies, Mickey didn't mention the bodies, when the debris was brought in, and he describes the debris in great detail. He says that we have an object in Florida, and I believe at Elgin Air Force Base, if I'm not correct. And then he says there's nothing in it. There's no propulsion system. And I thought, how does he know that? Apparently he'd seen it. And so then his wife chimes in, have you seen the materials? And I thought to myself, this is code. They're asking me if I've seen this object. And I said, no, I haven't. And then they told me other things, but less. He did. She didn't. In any case, it was a really golden opportunity. I realized that the visitors had not just chosen me out arbitrarily, that this was a family affair. And he introduced me to Arthur Exon. And General Exon proceeded to tell me, we had quite extensive conversations, that in 1988, he was still consulting with the scientific team that was working at Wright-Patterson at that time, where he had previously been commandant. And he was doing that because so much of what they had done in the early days was not put down on paper. It was pencils up all the way because it was so secret. And he explained that there had been biological material. I believe he told one of my cousins, who is now deceased, a little more about it. I think he said that there was an insect-like being, but she was a little oblique about it when I asked her about it, and now she's passed on. But I think that's what he said. And that would fit what I saw, certainly. Now, so this is 1947. We definitely know. It's the next thing that happens is Oops, pushed the wrong button. General Twining, this is the famous Twining memorandums found by Stanton Friedman. He describes the flying discs exactly the same way as then I find out, I look below us, and the apartment below us is entirely boarded up. And so I decide to call a landlord. And I call the